The girl's innocent visit. The morning sun fell gently over the busy streets, painting them with gold as people hurried along. Among them was a young girl named Amara. She was only 12 years old, but carried herself with a sense of responsibility that was rare for her age. Her navy blue school uniform was neatly pressed and her small backpack hung over her shoulders. In her hands, she clutched an envelope that held something very precious to her: her first savings. Amara's mother, Grace, walked beside her. Grace's steps were steady, filled with encouragement, and her warm smile kept her daughter's nervousness from spilling over. Grace was proud of her daughter. Ever since Amara was old enough to understand, she had encouraged her to set aside small amounts from pocket money, school awards, or even small chores she helped with at home. Amara had been saving patiently for months. She had a goal: to open her very own savings account. That morning was special. For Amara, it was not just about putting money into a bank. It was about learning something important, something her mother had taught her again and again, that saving meant building a future. Grace wanted her daughter to understand the value of money, the dignity of hard work, and the pride of responsibility. As they approached the tall glass building, Amara slowed down. Her eyes widened as she tilted her head back, staring at the large bank sign that towered over them. The structure looked intimidating. Businessmen in suits walked briskly in and out, carrying briefcases and speaking into their phones. Women in polished shoes and sleek outfits held folders and laptops, entering with determination. Everyone seemed so grown up, so confident, and so sure of themselves. Amara tightened her grip on the envelope. Her mother noticed the hesitation. She bent down slightly, placing her hand gently on Amara's shoulder. "Do not be afraid, my dear," Grace said softly. "This place is for everyone. You have saved with honesty, and that makes you worthy of being here. Remember, every great journey begins with a small step." Amara nodded, taking in her mother's words. They walked through the large glass doors, and the cool air of the bank surrounded them. The inside was even more intimidating than the outside. The marble floor shone under the bright lights, and the counter stretched across the room like gates guarded by serious-looking staff. Large digital screens displayed numbers and financial updates that meant little to Amara. She felt like she had stepped into another world, one that was far from her familiar school hallways and neighborhood streets. Despite her nerves, she stood taller. She wanted to do this right. She wanted to show her mother she was ready to take responsibility. They reached the reception desk, where a woman in a crisp white uniform sat behind a computer. She looked up, her eyes scanning Amara quickly, then shifting to her mother. Her expression was not warm. It was not welcoming. Instead, it was sharp, as though she were already irritated by their presence. Grace greeted her politely, introducing her daughter and explaining that Amara wished to open a savings account. The woman leaned back in her chair, folding her arms, and gave Amara a long stare. "And what exactly does she think she can save here?" the woman asked, her voice cold. Amara froze. She had imagined this moment so differently. She had thought there would be a smile, perhaps encouragement, maybe even someone congratulating her for taking her first step into saving. But instead, the woman's words cut through her excitement, leaving behind only uncertainty. I brought my savings," Amara said quietly, lifting the envelope. "I want to start an account so I can save more for the future." Her voice trembled, but her eyes held determination. She wanted this to be her moment of pride. The woman leaned forward now, her eyes narrowing at the small envelope. She gave a short, humorless laugh. "Your savings? Do you think this is some playground where children can walk in and pretend to be customers? This is a serious institution. We handle real money here, not pocket change." Amara's chest tightened. She looked at her mother, who immediately placed a protective hand over her shoulder. Grace's face remained calm, but her eyes had grown colder. She had dealt with people like this before. People who judged others without knowing them. People who measured worth only by appearances. "My daughter is here to learn responsibility," Grace said firmly. "She has saved honestly and she wishes to open an account. I believe your bank provides services for young savers as well." The woman waved her hand dismissively, her lips curling. "Perhaps in some neighborhood bank, but not here. This is not the place for people like her." The words were harsh, sharper than a knife. Amara felt them sink into her chest. She lowered her head, her fingers tightening around the envelope. For a moment she wished she had stayed home. She wished she had not dared to dream about opening an account. Her mother crouched down, lifting her daughter's chin so their eyes met. Grace whispered softly, "Do not let her words take away your pride, Amara. You belong here just as much as anyone else." Amara blinked back tears, her heart aching, but her mother's words gave her strength. She stood straighter again, though inside she was trembling. Behind them, a few customers had begun to notice the scene. Some whispered, some shook their heads, but no one stepped forward. The bank was filled with silence heavy enough to press down on the girl's small shoulders. Grace gently urged her daughter forward again, refusing to let the woman's arrogance end the day they had planned for so long. Amara clutched her envelope and took another step toward the counter. The woman, however, was not done. She leaned forward, pointing her finger directly at the child. Her voice grew louder, echoing across the lobby. "I told you already, little girl, this is no place for you. Take your little coins and go back home. We do not waste our time here with nonsense like this." The bank grew still. The girl's dream, so full of hope in the morning light, was being crushed in front of strangers. Her small hands shook and her lips quivered, but just then, as the woman's voice rang out, the glass doors at the entrance opened again. A tall man in a navy blue suit stepped inside. His walk was steady, his shoulders squared, and his expression calm yet powerful. People in the bank turned their heads as he passed, recognizing him instantly. Amara did not notice him yet. She was too focused on holding back her tears. But in just a few moments, her entire world, and the world of everyone in that bank, was about to change. The sound of the woman's harsh words seemed to echo off the walls, filling the air with something heavy and unkind. Amara stood still, her small body tense, the envelope of savings pressed tightly against her chest as if it were her only shield. She had imagined this day as a moment of pride, but now she felt like an intruder in a place she had dreamed of entering. Her mother's gentle hand rested firmly on her shoulder, silently telling her that she was not alone. The receptionist, however, did not stop. Her voice grew sharper, slicing through the quiet murmurs of customers who now watched the scene unfold. "Do you not understand?" she said, pointing again. "This bank is not for children and certainly not for you. People are here with serious business, not childish games." Her eyes swept over Amara's uniform, her worn backpack, and her small hands gripping the envelope. There was no trace of kindness in her gaze, only the kind of judgment that cuts deeper than words. Amara tried to steady herself. She wanted to speak, to defend her little dream, but her throat felt tight. Every eye in the room seemed to press down on her, as though waiting to see what she would do. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. For the first time, the little envelope that once made her feel proud now felt insignificant in her trembling hands. Grace, however, would not let her daughter's silence be mistaken for weakness. She stepped forward, her voice steady though her heart burned with anger. "My daughter has worked hard for this money," she said. "Every coin in that envelope was earned with honesty and patience. She has every right to be here, just like anyone else." The woman behind the desk gave a cold laugh. "Every right? Do you even know where you are standing? This is not a local corner shop. This is a prestigious bank. We serve business people, leaders, people with real accounts, not little children carrying pennies in envelopes." She leaned back, her voice loud enough for the entire hall to hear, as if humiliating a child in public was something she was proud of. Grace's grip on her daughter's shoulder tightened, not out of fear but out of determination. She bent slightly, whispering in Amara's ear, "Stand tall, my love. Do not let her words take away your strength." Her daughter's small head nodded, though her eyes were brimming with unshed tears. Customers around them exchanged uneasy glances. Some frowned at the employee's cruelty, but none stepped forward to say anything. It was easier to watch than to act, and so the silence of the crowd became another weight pressing on Amara. making her feel even more alone. The receptionist pointed again, her finger so close that Amara instinctively took a step back. "You heard me, child. This is not your place. Take that envelope and leave before you embarrass yourself further." Her words were sharp, cutting into the very core of the girl's heart. For Amara, the sting was not only in the words but in the way they were delivered, with absolute certainty, as though she truly did not belong, as though her dreams were nothing but foolish fantasies. She thought of the months she had saved, the coins she had carefully placed into her small box, the pride she had felt each time she added a little more. All of it now felt like it was being stripped away by one person's cruelty. Grace turned to her daughter, kneeling slightly so she could look directly into her eyes. "You are more than her words," she said softly. "Remember that. Your effort matters and you matter." Amara nodded again, holding tightly onto her envelope, but the lump in her throat made it hard to breathe. Just as the receptionist prepared to wave them off again, the glass doors opened with a soft thud, letting in a rush of cool air from outside. A tall man in a navy blue suit entered, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. His presence seemed to command attention without him saying a single word. Heads turned, whispers rose, and the atmosphere shifted. The man's eyes scanned the room, sharp and observant, before settling on the scene unfolding at the reception desk. He saw the young girl, her face pale with humiliation, her mother standing protectively beside her, and the receptionist leaning forward with a finger pointed accusingly. His steps slowed, his expression darkening, though his composure remained unbroken. Amara had not yet noticed him. Her eyes were on the floor, her cheeks hot with shame. She wondered if this was how dreams always ended, crushed before they even began. She wondered if she had made a mistake walking into the bank at all, but her mother's steady presence beside her gave her just enough strength to hold back tears. The receptionist, however, noticed the man almost immediately. At first she smiled, thinking him just another wealthy client she could serve, someone who belonged in her version of the bank. She straightened her uniform and prepared to switch her tone. But as the man walked closer, she realized he was not another client in line. He was heading straight toward the child she had been scolding. The bank grew silent once again, but this time for a different reason. The man's presence carried weight, and everyone in the lobby seemed to recognize him now. Some whispered his name, others simply stared, but all knew they were in the presence of someone important. Grace finally looked up and saw him approaching. Relief flickered in her eyes, though she did not show it on her face. She stood taller, holding her daughter's hand, waiting for what would come next. Amara finally noticed the shift in the room. She turned her head slightly, and her eyes widened as she saw the man walking toward her. For a moment, confusion filled her mind. Why was everyone staring? Why was the receptionist suddenly stiff, her confidence shaken? The man reached them, stopping right beside the little girl. He looked down at her gently, his eyes softening as he saw the envelope clutched tightly against her chest. Then he looked up at the receptionist, his expression firm, his silence heavier than any words. The woman's face grew pale. The arrogance that had filled her moments earlier began to fade. She swallowed hard, realizing far too late that her actions had been witnessed by the one person she should never have dared to offend. The bank lobby held its breath, waiting. The man finally spoke, his voice calm yet powerful, carrying through the hall with ease. "What exactly is happening here?" he asked. The question was simple, but the weight of it hung in the air like a storm cloud. Everyone turned to the receptionist, waiting for her to answer. She stammered, her lips moving but no sound coming out at first. The girl she had just called unworthy was no ordinary child. She was the daughter of the man who now stood before her, the very owner of the bank. And in that moment, the humiliation that Amara had felt began to shift, not because the pain was gone, but because the truth was about to rise, and with it, a lesson the entire room would never forget. The weight of silence in the bank lobby pressed down on everyone as if the air itself had thickened. Amara's small body trembled, though she stood still, refusing to let her tears fall. She clutched her envelope tighter, the corners bending under her grip. The receptionist, who only moments earlier had been full of arrogance, now shifted uneasily under the watchful eyes of both customers and the tall man standing nearby. Yet her pride, sharp and stubborn, would not let her back down so easily. She cleared her throat, straightened her back, and tried to hold on to the authority she believed belonged to her. "This girl," she began, her voice raised again though weaker than before, "came here thinking she could open an account. Look at her, she has no proper documents, no real money. She is wasting our time and holding up others who have important business." She glanced around the lobby, as if expecting others to nod in agreement to support her, but no one moved, no one spoke. Most simply looked away, unwilling to be part of her cruelty. Amara's heart sank deeper with every word. Each syllable felt like a hammer striking her small dream. She had not asked for special treatment. She had not come with arrogance, only with hope. She thought of the nights she had counted her coins, the mornings she had skipped buying candy so she could add just a little more to her box, and the excitement she had felt walking beside her mother on the way to the bank. Now all of that seemed foolish. Maybe the receptionist was right. Maybe she did not belong here. Grace placed her hand gently on her daughter's back, sensing the storm inside her. She whispered softly, "Hold on, Amara, do not let her words define you." Her own heart ached, not for herself but for her child. A mother could bear many insults, but seeing her daughter's innocent dream shattered before her eyes was like swallowing fire. The receptionist was not finished. She leaned forward, pointing her finger once again, her voice sharp and full of disdain. "Do you even understand how ridiculous this looks? You cannot expect us to take a little child seriously. Go to some other place, somewhere more suited to people like you. This is not the bank for you." The words "people like you" struck Amara like a thunderclap. They echoed in her mind, heavy and cruel, as though she was marked by something that could never change. She wanted to shout back, to say she had a right to be there, to demand respect, but her lips quivered and no sound came. The humiliation was too strong, too loud inside her head. Some customers shifted uncomfortably. One older man coughed nervously, looking at the floor, while a young woman near the corner bit her lip as though holding back words she dared not speak. The weight of inaction filled the room, turning every silent face into another wall around Amara. She felt trapped, surrounded by strangers who would not help, by words that burned, by dreams that seemed to crumble in her small hands. The tall man in the suit remained silent, his expression unreadable as he watched. His eyes, however, softened when they fell on Amara. He saw more than just a child being scolded. He saw a young spirit being tested, a moment that would leave marks deeper than most could imagine. He saw the pain in her eyes and the quiet strength she still held on to despite it all. Amara's mother finally spoke louder, her voice steady though her chest tightened with anger. "Enough," she said, looking directly at the receptionist. "You have no right to speak to my daughter this way. She came here with honesty and courage, and she has more dignity in her small hands than you have shown in your words." Her tone was calm but filled with the kind of strength only a mother could carry, the strength to protect, to shield, to fight when needed. The receptionist smirked, though her confidence faltered under Grace's gaze. "Dignity? Do you not see where you are? This bank is not a playground for teaching lessons to children. If she wants to save coins, she should keep them in a jar at home. We deal with real clients here." She emphasized the word real as though Amara were some shadow, invisible and unworthy of being counted. The sting of that word made Amara's chest tighten even more. Was she not real enough? Were her dreams not real enough? She looked at the envelope in her hands. Inside were not just coins and bills. Inside were her hopes, her first step toward being responsible, her belief that she could start small and grow. But now it all felt invisible, brushed aside as nothing. Her mother knelt down once more, cupping her daughter's face gently. "Listen to me, Amara," she whispered softly. "Do not believe her. Your dream is real. Your effort is real. You belong here." Tears filled Amara's eyes, but she nodded faintly. She wanted to believe her mother. But the sting of humiliation was heavy, too heavy for her young heart. The receptionist shook her head, rolling her eyes as though the scene bored her. "If you do not leave now, I will call security. I will not waste another minute on this nonsense." Her voice was sharp, and the way she stood with her chin raised high made it clear she thought she had won, that her words had crushed a child's spirit and proven her point. The silence that followed was thick. Amara's small body trembled, her hands gripping the envelope so tightly that her knuckles turned pale. She felt like she could not breathe, as though the entire bank were pressing against her chest. She wanted to disappear, to run out the door and never return. But before she could take a step, her mother's arm wrapped protectively around her. Grace stood tall, her voice strong now, carrying through the entire lobby. "You will not call security. My daughter has done nothing wrong. She is here to open an account, and she will do it whether you approve or not, because she has earned the right to be here." The receptionist opened her mouth to argue, but something stopped her. The tall man in the navy blue suit had stepped closer, his presence commanding silence without a single word. His eyes fixed on the woman, sharp and unyielding, and for the first time her arrogance cracked. She shifted in her seat, her face pale, realizing she might have made a mistake bigger than she could ever imagine. Amara, still trembling, looked up at the man, confused. Who was he? Why did everyone else suddenly look so uneasy, whispering his name? Why did the receptionist, who had been so sure of herself, suddenly look as if the ground beneath her feet was slipping away? The man finally spoke, his voice calm yet powerful, each word deliberate. "Is this how you treat every client who walks into this bank?" His tone was not raised, but it carried more weight than the receptionist's shouting ever could. The entire lobby went still, waiting for what would come next. The receptionist stuttered, her lips parting but no words coming out. She looked from the man to the child she had humiliated, her confidence draining from her face. Her chest rose and fell quickly as fear replaced arrogance. Amara stood silently, still holding her envelope. For the first time, the humiliation that had wrapped around her began to loosen, though the pain still lingered. Something was shifting, something she did not yet understand, but she felt it. The man's eyes softened again as they fell on the girl, and in that moment, she realized this was not just another customer. This was someone who carried authority, someone who could change everything. She did not yet know how, but the atmosphere of the room told her a truth she could not ignore. Her humiliation was about to transform into something far greater. The heavy silence inside the bank lingered, broken only by the nervous shuffling of papers and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Every person in the lobby seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for what would happen next. Amara stood close to her mother, still gripping the envelope as if it were the last piece of her dignity. Her heart raced, torn between fear and confusion. She did not understand why the receptionist, who only moments ago had looked so confident, now appeared pale and shaken. The tall man in the navy blue suit stepped closer, his polished shoes clicking softly against the marble floor. His face was calm, but his presence carried a weight that no one could ignore. He glanced at Amara, and his eyes softened for a brief moment, filled with a tenderness that only a father could show. Then he turned to the receptionist, and the softness was gone, replaced with a firmness that made her shrink in her seat. "What is happening here?" His voice was calm, but there was an authority in it that made the room grow colder. It was not a question that invited excuses. It was a question that demanded truth. The receptionist stammered, her lips trembling. She had been so sure of herself moments ago, mocking the child and belittling her mother. But now, under the weight of this man's gaze, her confidence vanished. "Sir, This child, Her words fell apart as quickly as she tried to form them. Grace straightened her back, her voice steady as she finally answered on behalf of her daughter. "My daughter came here today to open her very first savings account. She has been saving her money patiently and honestly for months. Instead of being treated with respect, she was humiliated. This woman told her she did not belong here. She told her to take her money and leave." The man's jaw tightened, though his expression remained composed. He turned his gaze toward Amara again. "Is that true?" he asked gently, his voice shifting from authority to kindness. Amara's throat felt dry. For a moment she could not speak, but then she nodded slowly. "I just wanted to open an account," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I saved all my money. I wanted to do something important." The man's heart ached at her words, though his face did not betray the depth of his emotion. He placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, a gesture that carried both comfort and assurance. Then he straightened and faced the receptionist once more. His eyes were sharp and his voice cut through the air like steel. "Do you know who this young girl is?" he asked. The receptionist blinked rapidly, her mouth opening but no sound coming out. Her eyes darted from the man to the girl and back again, a dawning realization creeping into her expression. She had assumed this child was nobody, just another face she could dismiss without consequence. But now, standing before her, was a man she recognized. Not as another customer, not as a client, but as the very face she had seen on company announcements, financial magazines, and television interviews. The whispers in the bank grew louder. Customers leaned toward one another, some covering their mouths in shock. "That's him," one man murmured. "That's the new owner." "That's Mr. Daniels." The receptionist's face drained of color. Her chest rose and fell quickly as panic replaced arrogance. She stuttered, I did not know. I did not realize." Mr. Daniels raised his hand, silencing her. "You did not realize who she was? That should not matter. Every person who walks into this bank deserves respect. Whether they are depositing $1 or $1 million, they are to be treated with dignity. But instead you chose to humiliate a child." "My child," the word struck like thunder. Gasps rippled through the lobby. The truth had been spoken, and with it, the full weight of the situation revealed itself. The receptionist's arrogance crumbled completely. She lowered her head, her lips trembling, unable to look at him or the girl she had mocked. Amara blinked, her small heart pounding. She looked up at the man beside her, her eyes wide with realization. "Daddy?" she whispered. Mr. Daniels looked down at her, his stern expression melting into a smile filled with love. He nodded gently, and for a moment the world around them disappeared. Amara's humiliation, her fear, all the weight pressing on her chest, suddenly it lifted. She felt safe again, protected by the presence of her father. Grace let out a slow breath, relief softening her features. She had held her strength for her daughter, but now she allowed herself the comfort of knowing that the man she trusted most was here. The bank employees behind the counters froze in their places, their hands hovering over keyboards, their eyes wide. None dared to move. The customers remained silent, all eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before them. It was not just a family moment they were witnessing. It was a lesson, a reckoning. Mr. Daniels stepped forward, his hand still resting protectively on his daughter's shoulder. He looked directly at the receptionist, who now looked as if she wished the ground would swallow her whole. "You have shown this bank's true weakness," he said, his voice calm yet unshakable. "It is not in the accounts or the numbers. It is not in the policies or the profits. It is in the way we treat people. You chose to judge my daughter by her age, her appearance, and the size of her envelope. But what you failed to see is her courage, her honesty, and her effort. That is worth more than any amount of money." The receptionist's hands shook. She tried to speak, but no words came. Her eyes glistened, not with remorse but with fear. Fear of consequences she could no longer avoid. Mr. Daniels turned back to Amara, kneeling slightly so he could look into her eyes. His voice softened again. "You did nothing wrong, my dear. You came here with hope and hard work, and that is something to be proud of. Do not let anyone ever tell you that you do not belong." Amara's lips trembled as she whispered, "But she said I should go home, that I don't belong here." Her father shook his head gently. "You belong here more than anyone. This bank is yours as much as it is mine, and today, you will open your account and the world will see that no one can take away your right to dream." Tears welled in Amara's eyes, but this time, they were not from humiliation. They were from pride, from the warmth of her father's words, from the strength he gave her simply by standing at her side. She nodded slowly, her small hands loosening their tight grip on the envelope. The crowd of customers who had been silent witnesses now shifted with emotion. Some smiled softly, others wiped their eyes discreetly. What had begun as a cruel spectacle had transformed into something far greater. A moment that reminded everyone watching of the true meaning of respect, of dignity, of family. Mr. Daniels stood again, his presence towering, his arm still protectively around his daughter. He turned to the employees watching behind their counters. "Prepare the account for my daughter," he said firmly. "She will be treated with the same respect you would give any client. In fact, with more, because today she is not just opening an account, she is proving that no one is too small to dream." The staff scrambled to act, their hands moving quickly, their eyes lowered in shame. The receptionist sank into her chair, her earlier pride shattered beyond repair. She had tried to break a child's spirit, but instead she had revealed her own weakness for all to see. As the papers were prepared and the account was set up, Amara stood tall beside her father and mother. The envelope in her hands no longer felt small. It felt like a symbol of everything she had endured and overcome. She handed it over proudly, her chin lifted, her heart steady. The bank lobby remained silent, but it was no longer the silence of shame or fear. It was the silence of respect. Everyone there knew they had witnessed something important, something that would linger long after the day was done. Amara looked up at her father as the process was completed. He smiled down at her, his eyes filled with pride. And in that moment she understood something she would never forget. True worth is not measured by the size of an envelope or the judgment of others. It is measured by courage, dignity, and the people who stand beside you when the world tries to push you down. The bank lobby was still buzzing with whispers, the kind that ripple through a crowd when a hidden truth has just been laid bare. Everyone had watched the scene unfold, but now the reality of it all began to sink in. The little girl, the one who had been mocked and dismissed, was not just any child. She was the daughter of the man who now stood firmly beside her, the very owner of the bank. Customers leaned toward one another, their voices hushed but urgent. "That's him," someone said, almost in awe. "Mr. Daniels, he bought the bank last year." Another whispered, "And that's his daughter." Imagine humiliating her like that. The murmurs spread like wildfire, each word carrying judgment, shock, and a growing sense of shame directed at the receptionist who had caused it all. Amara shifted uneasily under the weight of so many eyes. She had never been the center of attention before, and certainly not in this way, but when she looked up at her father, she saw no fear, no embarrassment, only pride and calm authority. His hand rested lightly on her shoulder, steadying her as if to remind her that she was safe. The receptionist, meanwhile, could barely keep her composure. Her earlier arrogance had melted into panic. Her face was pale, her lips dry, her hands trembling as she tried to shuffle the papers on her desk. She wanted to disappear, to undo the cruel words she had spoken, but it was too late. Every person in the lobby had seen, every person had heard. Mr. Daniels turned his gaze on her, and the room seemed to grow colder. His voice, though calm, carried a weight that silenced the last of the whispers. "When my daughter walked into this bank, she came not as my child, but as a customer. She came with savings she earned through patience and honesty, and yet instead of being welcomed, she was humiliated. Tell me, is this the standard of service you provide here?" The receptionist opened her mouth, but no words came. She stuttered, swallowed, then shook her head weakly. I didn't know. I didn't realize." Mr. Daniels raised his hand slightly, stopping her excuses. "You did not need to know who she was. That is the point. Respect is not given based on names or titles. It is given because every human being deserves dignity. My daughter could have been anyone's child, and your duty would have been the same. To treat her with kindness, to encourage her efforts, not crush them." The room remained silent, but it was a silence filled with emotion. Customers nodded softly, some ashamed they had not spoken earlier, others visibly moved by his words. Grace, standing beside her daughter, held her head high. For years, she had taught Amara about dignity, about the importance of never letting others define her worth. Now, watching her husband speak with such strength, she felt those lessons come alive in the most powerful way. Amara looked up at her father, her young heart swelling with a mix of relief and pride. She whispered quietly, almost as if afraid to break the stillness. "Daddy," she said, "I couldn't open an account." The words, simple and honest, struck harder than any accusation could. The receptionist flinched, her face burning with shame. Mr. Daniels turned toward his daughter, kneeling slightly so he could look her in the eye. "And yet here you are," he said gently. "You stood your ground. You did not run away even when her words tried to push you down. That is strength, Amara. Do not forget that." Her lips trembled as she nodded. For the first time since walking into the bank, she felt her small envelope was not just money. It was proof of her perseverance, her courage, her worth. Mr. Daniels rose again, his presence towering, his voice resonant. "Let me make this clear for everyone here," he said, addressing the lobby as much as the employees. "This bank is not mine alone. It belongs to every person who walks through those doors. It belongs to the workers saving for their families, to the mothers teaching their children responsibility, to the young people daring to dream. If we cannot honor them, then we do not deserve to stand here at all." A soft murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. A woman near the back wiped a tear from her eye. A man in a suit gave a firm nod, his respect for Mr. Daniels plain on his face. Even the employees behind the counters lowered their heads, ashamed of the cruelty that had been allowed to happen in their presence. The receptionist, trembling, finally found her voice. "Sir, I am so sorry. I did not mean..." But Mr. Daniels cut her off with a firm shake of his head. You meant every word. Do not insult us further by pretending otherwise. The question now is not what you meant, but what you will learn. This is not about my daughter alone. This is about every customer who has been dismissed, every voice silenced, every dream belittled. Today it was my child. Tomorrow it could be someone else's, and that is unacceptable. His words hung in the air, heavy with truth. The receptionist lowered her head completely, unable to meet his eyes. Her arrogance was gone, replaced by the cold reality of her mistake. Amara stood quietly, her small fingers relaxing as she finally loosened her grip on the envelope. She looked around and saw the faces of strangers watching her, not with judgment now, but with admiration and respect. For the first time, she felt that she did belong here, that her little envelope of savings mattered. Her father turned back to her, his expression softening once more. Are you ready to open your account, Amara? He asked. She nodded shyly, her heart pounding, but this time with excitement instead of fear. Yes, Daddy, she whispered. He smiled and guided her gently toward the counter. The employees hurried to prepare the forms, their hands fumbling slightly as they worked under his watchful eye. Every movement carried the weight of the moment, every pen stroke an acknowledgement that they had witnessed something they could never forget. As Amara handed over her envelope, her hands no longer shook. She felt taller, stronger, as if the humiliation she had endured had transformed into pride. Her mother placed a gentle hand on her back, whispering, I told you, my love, you belong here. The bank lobby remained hushed, but it was no longer the silence of shame. It was the silence of awe, of respect, of understanding. People had come in that day expecting routine transactions, but they were leaving with a story they would tell again and again, the day a little girl reminded everyone of the true meaning of worth. Mr. Daniels stood behind his daughter, his presence steady, his pride unmistakable. He had seen many victories in his life, many successes and achievements. But in that moment, none of them compared to watching his daughter open her very first account, not as the owner's child, but as a determined young girl who refused to let the world steal her dream. And as the papers were signed and the account officially opened, a quiet but powerful truth settled over everyone present. Respect cannot be bought. It cannot be faked, and it should never depend on appearances. It must be given freely, because every person who walks through those doors carries dreams that deserve to be honored. For Amara, the humiliation she had endured would never be forgotten. But neither would the lesson her father had taught the entire bank that day, that dignity is not given by others, it is claimed by standing tall, even when the world tries to push you down. The room seemed to hold its breath as the final papers were placed on the counter for Amara to sign. Her small hand trembled only slightly as she took the pen, but her father's steady presence beside her gave her all the courage she needed. One stroke after another, she wrote her name carefully, the letters shaky but proud. The employees watched quietly, and the customers who had gathered leaned in with interest, almost reverently. When she placed the pen down, it was as if something had shifted in the atmosphere. A child had done what someone tried to tell her she could not, and she had done it with dignity. Her father, Mr. Daniels, looked around the bank, his eyes moving over the faces of the staff, the customers, and finally resting on the receptionist who still sat frozen in her chair. His voice, when he spoke, was calm but powerful enough to cut through every corner of the room. What you have all witnessed today is not just my daughter opening her first account. What you have seen is how easily dignity can be torn apart by words, and how quickly an environment meant to build trust can become a place of fear. No one moved. The sound of his voice carried far more weight than the ticking clock, than the footsteps in the hallway outside, than the shuffling of papers. He turned slightly toward the receptionist, his gaze firm. You believed her money was too little, her age too young, her presence unworthy. But what you forgot is that this bank was not built on money alone. It was built on trust, on dreams, on the hope of people who want to build their future. And my daughter came here with that same hope. When you crushed her with your words, you did not just insult her. You insulted every single person who dares to walk into these doors believing they matter. The woman lowered her head, her shoulders slumping. Her earlier bravado was gone. She had no reply, no excuse strong enough to defend what she had done. But Mr. Daniels did not speak only for her. He turned his attention to everyone present. We often think power is in wealth, in big numbers, in large accounts. But true power, he said slowly, is in how we treat the smallest of us. Respect does not begin with the man carrying a briefcase full of contracts. Respect begins with the child carrying her first envelope of savings. Because if we cannot honor the beginning of a journey, we do not deserve to be part of its success. A murmur of agreement rippled softly among the customers. One elderly gentleman nodded deeply, his eyes glistening. A young mother standing near the entrance pulled her own son closer, whispering something to him about remembering this moment. The lesson was sinking in, reaching places deeper than the bank's polished floors or high glass ceilings. Amara looked up at her father, her heart swelling. To her, he had always been strong, always been the man who worked hard to give her everything she needed. But today he was more than that. Today he was showing her what it meant to stand tall, not just for oneself, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel small. Mr. Daniels's gaze swept across the room once more, pausing on the staff members behind their counters. Their eyes lowered in shame, but he spoke not with anger but with clarity. Every person you see, every mother, every father, every worker, every child, they are the reason this bank stands. Without them, these walls are empty. Without their trust, your jobs mean nothing. And if any one of you forgets that, then you have forgotten why we are here. The words cut deep, but they also healed. They reminded the staff of something they had lost in routine. In numbers and procedures, that banking was not just about money, but about people. The receptionist finally found the courage to lift her head slightly, her eyes wet. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "I was wrong." The words were weak, but they were real. Mr. Daniels did not smile, nor did he soften his tone. Being wrong is human, but learning from it is necessary. You will remember today not as the day you humiliated a child, but as the day you realized how dangerous your arrogance could be. If one cruel word can push someone away, one kind word can give them courage. And from this moment forward, kindness will be the foundation of this bank. Amara squeezed her mother's hand, feeling the warmth of pride in her chest. She no longer felt like the small girl who had walked in nervously clutching her envelope. She felt stronger, as though she had claimed her place not just in the bank but in the world. Her father turned back to her, his eyes soft now, filled with pride. "You see, Amara," he said, his voice low enough for her but loud enough for all to hear. "Dreams are fragile things. They can be broken easily by harsh words. But when you stand your ground, when you keep your faith, no one can take them from you. You proved that today, and I could not be prouder." Her lips curved into the smallest smile, her eyes glistening not with tears of pain this time, but with the glow of accomplishment. She whispered, "Thank you, Daddy." Grace, who had stood quietly but firmly throughout, finally allowed herself a deep breath. She wrapped her arms gently around her daughter and husband, her voice calm but strong. "This is what we teach our children. That respect is not something to be begged for. It is something every human being deserves. And when it is denied, it is our duty to remind the world of its importance." The customers, who had watched silently until now, began to applaud. It was not a loud, raucous applause, but a steady, meaningful one. Each clap echoed with agreement, with respect, with the acknowledgement that they had just witnessed a lesson worth carrying beyond the walls of the bank. Even some employees joined in, their shame turning into resolve to do better, to remember the dignity of the people they served. The receptionist's face was red, her eyes downcast. The applause was not for her, but it reminded her of the cost of her cruelty. Yet somewhere deep down she also felt its lesson. Perhaps in her own way, she too would leave changed. Mr. Daniels lifted his hand slightly, and the applause softened, then stopped. "Today," he said firmly, "this bank has learned something it should never forget. Wealth means nothing without respect. Success means nothing without humility, and authority means nothing without compassion. From this day forward, let this bank be known not just for its numbers, but for the way it treats people. Let it be a place where no child, no parent, no worker ever feels they do not belong." The words sank into the walls, into the people, into the very air of the place. No one who stood there would forget them. Amara leaned against her father, her small body finally relaxing. The envelope she had once clutched so tightly was gone, deposited into her brand new account. But in her heart, she carried something far greater, a memory, a lesson, and a pride that would guide her for years to come. The bank lobby, once filled with tension and humiliation, was now filled with something else entirely: hope, respect, and the reminder that sometimes the smallest person in the room can teach the greatest lesson of all. The air inside the bank no longer carried the sting of humiliation. Instead, it was filled with a quiet reverence, as if every person present knew they had just been part of something greater than an ordinary day. The clapping had faded, but the echoes of it still lingered in the room, etched into memory. Amara stood a little taller now, her chin lifted, her small hands no longer trembling. She looked around and noticed the faces that had earlier been indifferent or curious, now gazing at her with admiration. For the first time that day, she felt not like a child out of place, but like someone who truly belonged. Her father placed a hand gently on her back and guided her to the side, away from the reception desk that had been the center of the storm. Grace followed, her eyes full of quiet pride. Together, the three of them stood as a family, united, strong, and unshaken by what had transpired. The receptionist, pale and humbled, remained seated behind her desk. She did not dare to speak again. Her earlier confidence had vanished entirely, leaving only the hollow reminder of her mistake. She had tried to make a little girl feel small, but instead she had revealed the smallness of her own heart. The contrast between Amara's courage and her cruelty was clear to everyone, and no apology could erase the memory of what had been witnessed. Mr. Daniels turned back once more to face the people in the lobby. His voice carried across the hall, calm but filled with conviction. "Let today be remembered," he said, "not as a day of shame, but as a day of learning. This bank will not be defined by arrogance or prejudice. It will be defined by the respect it gives to those who trust it. From the smallest account to the largest investment, every person who walks through these doors deserves dignity, and that begins today, here with my daughter." There was a weight in his words that seemed to settle into the very walls. Customers nodded quietly. Employees exchanged uneasy glances, but also looks of resolve. They all knew something had changed. What had been just another morning at the bank was now a turning point, a reminder that institutions are only as strong as the values they uphold. Amara listened, her eyes wide, absorbing every word. She knew her father was not speaking only for her. He was speaking for everyone who had ever been dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated. And though she was still just a child, she felt the responsibility of his words settle gently on her shoulders. Her mother leaned down and whispered in her ear, "Do you see now why we save? Why we work hard? Not just for money, Amara, but for respect. For the chance to prove that no one can take away our dignity." Amara nodded slowly, her small voice whispering back, "I understand. Mama, the papers were finalized, the account officially opened, and the bank staff handed Amara her very first passbook. She held it carefully, her fingers tracing the embossed letters on the cover. It was more than just a book. It was proof of her journey, her resilience, and her victory. She looked at it with a pride that filled her from head to toe. Her father crouched down to her level once again, his eyes warm. "You see this book?" he asked. She nodded. "This is not just numbers on paper. This is a reminder that you never gave up. When someone told you that you did not belong, you stayed. You stood, and you claimed what was rightfully yours. Carry this with you always, not just in your hand, but in your heart." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of joy, of pride, of the strength she had found within herself. She wrapped her small arms around her father's neck and whispered, "Thank you, Daddy." The customers, still watching, began to stir again. One woman stepped forward, her voice soft but clear. "Sir, thank you for showing us what true leadership looks like. Many of us will leave here better people today." Others nodded, murmuring their agreement. A man in a suit, clearly a longtime client, added, "Respect is worth more than all the money in the world. I'll remember this day as long as I live." The receptionist sat silently, her eyes fixed on the desk, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She knew she had been given a lesson she would carry forever. Though her shame burned hot, she also felt something else, a strange sense of gratitude. She had been forced to confront her own cruelty, and perhaps in time she would grow from it. Mr. Daniels did not linger on her. He had no need to crush her further. The weight of the truth was enough. Instead, he turned his attention back to his daughter, holding her hand as they prepared to leave. "Come, Amara," he said softly. "You've done what you came here to do." As they walked toward the door, the lobby seemed to part for them, the crowd moving aside with quiet respect. Some smiled, Some bowed their heads slightly and others simply watched in silence. Grace walked proudly beside her husband and daughter, her heart swelling with gratitude for the strength of the family she had built. When they reached the glass doors, Amara paused for a moment and looked back. She saw the grand hall, the polished floors, the digital screens flashing numbers, the counters lined with staff. But what she noticed most was not the building itself. It was the people, the faces, the looks of reflection, of thought, of change. She realized that what had happened was no longer just her story. It belonged to everyone who had seen it, and it would live on in their memories. Her father noticed her pause and asked gently, "What are you thinking, my love?" Amara smiled softly, clutching her new passbook to her chest. "I'm thinking that one day, Daddy, I'll teach others too, the way you taught them today." His eyes softened, pride shining through. He placed a hand on her shoulder and whispered, "That is all I could ever hope for." And with that, the doors opened and the family stepped out into the sunlight. The day that had begun with fear and humiliation ended with dignity, pride, and a lesson the city would not soon forget. The story of the little girl at the bank spread far beyond those walls. Customers shared it with their families, employees carried it home, and even strangers who had only witnessed from afar told it as though it were their own. It became a story not about money but about respect, not about wealth but about humanity. And for Amara, it became the first chapter of a lifetime of lessons. A reminder that no matter how small you feel, no matter how harsh the words against you, your worth cannot be defined by others. It can only be defined by the strength you carry within and the people who stand beside you when you need them most.